Bonjour, bonsoir. How are you? It's Mary Schiller, and I am really happy to be with you right now for this talk called How to Have Anything You Want: Three Simple Steps to Change Your Life Starting Now. If you are enjoying this on a replay, thank you so much for investing the time to do that. If you are here with me live, please feel free to say hello in the chat so I know you can see and hear me okay. Hello, Mimi. How are you? Hello, Jimmy. Lovely to see you. So happy you're all here. And just to clarify, you can see and hear me okay, right? I'm just checking. A couple of little minor housekeeping things first. Please do feel free, if you're here with me live, to type into the chat anytime. I will definitely be watching. Great. Thank you, Mimi. I will be watching because this is a conversation and I want to involve you in it as much as possible. If you have a specific question, if you see in the chat box, there's a little question mark. You can click on that and type a question, and I will be alerted that there is a question there. So in that way, I will be sure not to miss it. But it's okay if you don't want to do that and you just want to type your question and your comments into the chat. That's absolutely fine too. So, what a ride we are about to go on here. Before I dive in, I need to say a couple of other things, which are something that I don't hear a lot of people saying often enough. Thanks. Thank you so much. First of all, this is really what I would call a judgment-free zone. We are not going to spend this time together berating ourselves for things that we have done or haven't done, or things we haven't achieved, things we haven't been in our lives. This is not about judging ourselves at all. It's also a space where I really want you to feel free to not hold back. I am not going to hold back in this talk. I never do. But in this particular one, I'm going to be sharing some new ideas with you that I have never said in this kind of forum before. And I have no intention of holding back. So, really, to get the most out of this experience, even if you are watching or listening on a replay, as you are listening, please don't hold back. This is not the time for that. If anything, this is the time to be as honest and open as you can be. If you're jumping on, please do say hello in the chat. I would love to see who is here. I can only see numbers, not who is actually on here. I also want to mention that this is a place where we are going to explore ideas that really may challenge you in a good way. And if you feel challenged, I want to assure you that that is meant to happen. Because in my view, if we are going to live a more expansive life, one that is going to lead us in some new directions, lead us in a transformative experience, we really do need to challenge what we already know. And we also need to let go of a lot of old ideas that just aren't serving us anymore. It may mean that you have some big aha moments, things you've been maybe tolerating in your life that you no longer want to tolerate. Sometimes these can be very emotional. I may get emotional during this talk. It's all okay. It's all okay. This is a place where we can go on this exploration together, and we don't have to worry about any of that for the time that we are here. Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much. I also want to mention, and if you have been with me for any length of time, you will know that this is true, that this is not going to be a time where I'm going to be talking about things like changing your limiting beliefs or anything remotely related to any of that. So we are going in a very different direction from all of that. And I'm hoping that you will find the content of this talk to not only be new and interesting and fresh, but also something that you will take with you and really explore on your own after we are through. Uh, so nice to see everybody communicating in the chat. And lastly, before I get into kind of the meat of everything, I want to say this, and I'm already feeling myself getting a little emotional here, but let me know in the chat how this feels for you. Right now is a new moment. Right now is a new moment. There's no past, there's no future. It's just now. It's you, it's me, it's all of us right now. And that means to me that we can be new in this moment. It's a new you, it's a new me. This moment has never happened before. And that means also to me that we are ready for change. We are made to change. And we don't have to look at anything that has happened up until now as indicative of anything. It doesn't have any bearing on this moment right now because it's not this moment right now. And whenever I remember that truth, I always get a sense of freedom because it means that I am free to see who I am right now. I'm free to speak like the person I am right now. I am free to do things that I've never done before. And so my hope is that by being in this room, if you will, even though it's a virtual room with me and all of us together, that you will also be reminded of the fact that this is new, this is a new time, this is a new moment, this is a new you. So, how is everyone feeling right now as we get started? I myself am always excited when I get to deliver a class like this. I love the fact that it is a kind of potent format. Oh, great, Mimi. It's a potent format because we are here right now. There's nothing coming after this. This is the moment. And I always enjoy bringing as much energy as I can to a class like this. I'm also curious to know if you would like to share in the chat what it is that brought you here. Why did you feel like the topic of this talk was something that you wanted to hear about? Do you feel, in other words, that there is more for you? Do you have this sense of kind of a deep yearning within yourself to have more, to do more, to be more while you're still here? That was a big motivation for me to host this class, in that I have learned to not try to suppress that yearning and instead to listen to it and to respond to it, because I know that it's there for a reason. It's not just there for some random nothingness. If that were the case, we wouldn't have been given those kinds of feelings, those deep desires and those yearnings and those wants and needs and all of those things. They are there for a reason. Hi, Mimi. I definitely feel there's more for me. I love hearing you speak. I always come away with new insights. That's lovely. Who else would like to share why you decided to sign up for this talk? And it can be any reason at all. It can be because you feel like there is something specific that you want to have in your life that you don't have now. Or it could be more generalized. It could be that you just know that you have more in you. You have more in you that wants to come out into this world and to be expressed. Hi, Jimmy. I've been practicing Mary's phrase of what if it's easy for the last few months, and it's been revolutionary. Amazing. So I wanted to see what new stuff Mary's got. I love that, Jimmy. Thank you. I still live by what if it's easy. I really do. It's been that and follow the fun are my two sort of mantras that I try very hard to live by all the time. So let's look at, for just a few minutes, what most people do when they are trying to change something in their life, when they want to have something that they don't have. This has been my experience in listening to other people talk about this. In fact, just recently, I was listening to someone talk about this very topic, and I was just like, yeah, this is the typical advice. So what is the typical advice? If you were going to break it down, it seems to me that the first thing that people are usually told is you need to get very, very clear about what it is that you want. Have you heard that before? That you have to have a very detailed description in your mind, or you can write it out, and you need to get very clear, very, very, very clear about what it is that you want. Now, I am not saying that you can't do that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having some sort of vision. But where I see that being a little problematic in all of my working with people is a lot of times we don't even know exactly what it is. We may have more of a sense of, I want something different. I want something that feels more me in my life. Whatever that is, I don't know, but I'm open to it. And I think what can happen is that when people are first told, the very first step needs to be, you need to get very clear on what you want down to the smallest detail, and they can get very lost in that. I have had many, many conversations with people for whom it's very hard for them to say exactly what they want. What they end up saying is something more like, I want to have more sense of myself, or I want to have more freedom in my life, or I want to have more of a sense of creativity and expression in my life. But to try to pin them down on exactly how that is supposed to appear is really, really impossible for most people. Kelly says, you totally agree. It's overwhelming. It has been for me in the past, because in the past, I definitely tried to do those sorts of things. I tried to get clear on what I wanted. But the truth was, I couldn't picture it in detail. It was more like a sensation that I was after. And even that felt sort of so nebulous that, I just kind of gave up. So we're not going to do that. I'm not going to ask you, what do you want? And you need to write it down and describe it in detail in the comments. We're not going there, because I personally think that that is very problematic. Hi, Mimi. This is because of the explanation of the law of attraction. If you don't describe everything you want in great detail, you get the wrong things. At least that's what it looks like to me. Mimi, that may be true. I personally don't subscribe to the law of attraction. I have not read enough about it to know what it asks people for, but I have a feeling that that is what I was just describing, that it is something like that, where in order to quote unquote manifest something, you have to know what you want to manifest. And that just seems like it brings with it a whole host of problems that end up holding people down instead of setting them free. So we're not going to do that. Another thing that I hear people do, and I have talked about this, but in a different way. Tell me, you don't subscribe to it either, maybe. Gotcha. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Is then you're supposed to write out all of the reasons that you believe you don't have the thing that you want to have, right? You're supposed to look at all of these things and literally write them down. I can't have it because da 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 da, and all these different supposed reasons, might call them excuses, whatever you want to say, for why you haven't been able to create or generate or manifest, whatever word you want, this thing that you want for yourself. Now, the reason why we're not going in that direction here is because whatever those statements are, they are made up. And if you're going to say, well, Mary, that's why a lot of people have you write them down so you can see that they're made up. Well, I don't see the point of even taking that step because the stories may change from day to day. I might have one list today and an entirely different list tomorrow. And am I just supposed to keep writing these things down that are made up stories? That seems like a waste of time. And that seems like time that is being taken away from me that I could be using towards going for what I want in life instead of constantly being, in observation mode and writing down mode of all of these supposed reasons why this hasn't occurred for me yet. My approach over the years has always been to focus on what we want and just ignore the rest. I just don't see the point of giving any space at all for those kinds of statements. So let me know in the chat if that is making sense to you, because we are not going there either. I don't want to spend any of our time together exploring all of these supposed reasons or excuses or whatever for any of that. That just seems like not a good use of your time or my time. And then the third thing that people will often say is once you've gotten clear on what you want, and then you've knocked away all of these excuses for why you shouldn't have it. Well, I'm glad this is making sense, Mimi. Then what is usually the next thing that people say? Okay, you've gotten clear. You've also gotten clear on all of your excuses. So then what's the next thing to do? Well, the next thing that people are usually told is that they should take action, right? Sometimes they say take massive imperfect action. I'm sure you've heard that phrase. It's all over the place and has been for a long time. Now, there is some, change your mindset. So I take that, Mimi, as part of that second piece about, looking at all of these excuses and all of these reasons, we're trying to eliminate that. You know me, if you've been around me at all, I don't subscribe to the whole change your mindset thing either. That just seems like a waste of time because there's nothing we can do about a thought once it's happened. It's already out there. So the next thing that people usually say is, all right, well, now it's time to take action on what you want. Time to take action. Well, there is some validity to taking action, of course. However, there's also something underneath the way that most people approach that that often comes across to me as being, and I'm not trying to slight anyone, but it comes across as being slightly judgmental, like as if you haven't taken action before. um, and like, well, now that you're clear on your vision and now that you've gotten rid of the excuses, now your action is going to lead you somewhere. And I have always been left with this feeling of, well, what if I'm not totally clear on what I want? And what if, I'm still listening to some of those excuses sometimes? Does that mean that the action I take is not going to work? So I feel like there is all of this kind of pressure that's then laid onto people to take massive, messy, inspired action and get results. It's all about the results. It's all about achieving and having that thing that you envisioned. Now, when I started to reflect on all of this before I started talking with you, I was realizing that for me, and you let me know what you think, that whole series of steps, basically get clear, write out all the excuses so you can debunk them and cross them off, and then get into action, is just very old and tired. And it doesn't, to me, take into account anything that I might describe as, and forgive the word, but magic. It seems very much like I don't know, a very boring recipe for supposed change. And I'm sure that for some people it might work. In my experience, however, it hasn't worked for the people that I have spoken to. It has not helped them to kind of get past this very, I don't know, I would call it sort of a narrow and small view of human beings. To me, that description, get clear on your vision, write out all the excuses and get rid of them, and then take action. It just sounds, I don't know, it doesn't sound very fun. As you know, I'm about following the fun. It also doesn't sound very easy, to Jimmy's point. What if it's easy? It doesn't sound easy. To me, it sounds heavy and just not very fun. So, what is different about what you and I are going to be talking about starting in about a minute or so is that we are talking about having what you want and changing things in a much, much, much larger context. And it's difficult for me to describe the difference that this perspective has made in my life. It's really been the catalyst for changing everything, is this much larger perspective on who we are as human beings. And that is the first step that I'd like to share with you. And before I share this, I want to say this. The 3 steps that I'm going to share are steps, quote unquote, but they're much bigger than that. So it's not going to be like, take out your pen, step 1, take out the paper, step 2. It's not going to be like that. These are much larger than that. So what is step 1? And if you'd like to type this in the chat afterwards, just to kind of solidify it in your mind, that would be great. Step 1 is remember who you are. Remember who you are. So here's a question. Great, Mimi. Here's a question for you. And I will guide you through this, but I would love to hear from you in the chat what comes to mind. Who are you? Who are you? Are you the sum total of everything that has occurred in your life? Are you the ideas that float through your mind about yourself? Are you the sum total of what other people think you are? Who are you? I know that for me, I used to see myself as a person who was a failure in about 90% of my life, 10% being reserved for the relationship that I had and still have with my daughter. But I really used to see myself as a failure, not just someone who failed, but as a failure. I was a failure. That's how I saw myself. And I saw myself that way because I was looking at myself from this angle of making a decision when I was a young person that ended up having a very intense, scary, horrible ripple effect on what I perceived to be the rest of my life. And since I couldn't go back in time and fix that mistake as I saw it, I saw myself as an utter failure. It affected, this is how I perceived it. And I was a failure because that decision affected my personal life. It affected my child. It affected my family. It affected my career. It affected me living out any dreams that I might have had. It went on and on and on. This story of Mary is a failure. It looked to me like anything that I had dreamed of before was gone. And anything that I might be thinking about for myself in the future was also gone because I saw myself that way. The problem with that, of course, as you can probably tell, is that it was a story. It had nothing to do with who I actually was and who I actually am. It was a story that had taken place in my own mind, and I kept listening to it over and over and over again. And to go to your point, Mimi, about changing your mindset, at a certain point, I realized that trying to change that story into another story was also pointless because it was simply creating a new story. And I didn't want that. I wanted to know who I was. Underneath all of those stories, who are we? Who am I? Who are you? So, let me see. Mimi says, I find it difficult to answer this question. I know that I'm more than I think I am, but it's hard to see that. It's hard to explain. Okay, well, let's go into it a little further because this is a really crucial foundation here. The way that I see this is that there is no story of you. That you and I are essentially neutral power. We are neutral power. And the life force that we experience here is that power, so that the only story of you or me is the one that life is experiencing through us. And that is a story of power, of possibility, of endless, limitless creativity, of endless, what's the word I'm looking for? Not just change, but, an infinite, I'm looking for a word and it's not coming to me. The word that keeps coming up is fruition, but a coming to fruition of things is the best way I can say it. Jimmy says, I am the unchanging awareness which watches all the stories. That's beautifully put, Jimmy. So if you are this awareness that's neutral and changing, I would say neutral kind of, that watches all of the stories, that is a very powerful being you're talking about. Kelly says expansion. Yes, that's a great word. That's a great word, Kelly. Yes, expansion. And we can look at ourselves from this angle of, if we are this awareness that's watching the stories, as Jimmy says, or if, like I'm saying, we are a powerful force that is basically being lived as life itself, then how could we describe ourselves? If you had to, for example, describe your story, if you will, of power, how might you describe that? Ooh, spaciousness. That's a good word, Kelly. How might you describe the story of Jimmy as power, the story of Mimi as power, the story of Kelly as power? In my own case, if I'm bringing it down, if you will, to the human level, I could say that the power that I have shared as the story is a powerful story of resilience, of not of being an example of life not giving up, of, when a dandelion or something is underneath the surface of the cement in the sidewalk, and you see it poke through, or the grass pokes through. I've always been inspired by that. It may seem silly, but honestly, whenever I stop and look at that, I think to myself, that is an example of this life force, this powerful life force that can, with something as delicate as a blade of grass, push through something as seemingly immovable as cement. That is just a tiny illustration of the power that you and I have, that is coursing through us, that is living through us all the time. So if you're here with me live, can you think of a word or two that could describe how you, as you, like little you, if you will, has exhibited this powerful life force? How has that shown up? Like I said, for me, it's definitely been in resilience, of capability beyond what my little intellectual self could imagine. I have done things that I never thought that I could do. I've certainly, to many people, been an example of courage, even though I haven't felt that myself. What has been one of your stories related to power? And if you want to think about that after this talk, that would be amazing, because this is a really interesting and transformational, really, thing to think about. Hi, Mimi says nurturing and people pleasing. So people pleasing in a good way. Because certainly it can be if if you are if you are someone who is in this place, in this mode of taking care of others, that is definitely a powerful story that is being lived through you. Staying open, Kelly says, that's a beautiful one too, because certainly life itself needs to stay in a place of openness and spaciousness and expansion, as you mentioned a moment ago. Hi, Jimmy. Also, resilience and courage in the face of perceived illness. So, one of the Jimmy stories, if you will, of power has been being courageous and being resilient. And those are bigger stories than the actual event. Let me know if that is coming through for you. I think the normal conversation, as we talked about before, is it's not bad. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it's small. It's a small conversation. We are in a much larger conversation where we are looking at what we are, who we are. And to me, that is the foundation of everything, is remembering who you are. You are not the story or stories that you've been listening to. That's not who you are. You are a story of power. You are a story of resilience. You are a story of courage, of nurturing, staying open, expansion, spaciousness, awareness. All of those are the story of you and can at least give you a glimpse, small glimpse, into who you actually are and what you actually are. I almost think of myself most of the time as a what, not a who, which may sound strange, but I I think it's helpful for us to recognize that we are not this little persona that we are living in. This isn't who we are either. Would you agree with that? I am not this 5'10" plus woman with short blonde hair who smiles a lot. That's a persona. That's what this power is living in and expressing itself through, but that's not what I am. It's not what I am. And however you appear in physical form is not who you are, not what you are. We can look at examples from our own life. We can certainly look at examples of other people, maybe people who have had some, really challenging physical things happen to them. And yet their persona, if you will, their outer shell may look different, but yet we can see past it very easily. We can see that they are not that story, that has nothing to do with them. And that's why earlier I wanted to be clear that we're not going into those stories because they're just not pertinent to creating more of what we want and listening to those desires. So let me know in the chat, how is this landing for you so far? Do you see the difference in the conversation between, envisioning what you want and, changing your mindset and, then taking action? Do you see the difference between that and what we're doing, which is really looking way, way, way past that into who and what we actually are? This was the game changer for me in my life, the absolute game changer, because when I started to see, oh my gosh, actually, I am not a failure. Again, I didn't just see myself as someone who failed. I saw myself as a failure. When I started to clue in to what we're talking about, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not a failure. I can't be labeled like that. I can see that there has been a powerful life experience that has been lived through me. And it has all of these other qualities that have nothing to do with failure. That's an idea that has no relevance whatsoever. Hi, Mimi. I see the difference. I love what you're sharing with us. Oh, cool, Mimi. Thank you. And if you have questions or something doesn't make sense, tell me in the chat because this is a conversation. The other thing that is so important about this particular piece of remembering who we are is that it allows us to, as I just alluded to, remember that we aren't a problem that needs to be solved. We don't have to look at any ideas that float through our mind as problematic, which is what the typical methodology wants us to do. It wants us to see ourselves as having some kind of barrier between us and what we want to have. And what you and I are doing here is really coming at this from a perspective of, frankly, there's nothing limiting about us at all. And the things that we want to have, those desires that we hear and feel within ourselves, are important because they are indicating, they are showing us in a very tangible, sort of almost a physical way, that we are made of power, that power is at work in us all the time. So you don't have to spend another second ever trying to manage yourself or manage or change something about your thinking or your emotions or anything, because all of that is there on purpose. It's all there on purpose. It's because it is the real story of being you. It's the real story of being human. Amen, Kelly says. That's how I felt too, Kelly. I was like, oh my gosh, you mean I don't have to spend any more time trying to quote unquote fix myself because there's nothing wrong with me? Oh my gosh, that was a revelation. It was an absolute revelation. When I started to see myself as not this little Mary persona failure thing, person, whatever, I was like, oh wow, now I can start to really listen to what is underneath all of that, and I can start to respond to it. I can start to hear what is within me, and I can start to answer it instead of being so worried that there was something wrong with me and having that consume my time and my energy. What's interesting too is that, I think when we look at other people, I certainly did this, we can sometimes think that if someone has achieved a lot or done a lot more, quote unquote, more than we have, that somehow they're better than we are, or they've got more of this power or something like that. Well, that is just not true. It's just not true. You have no more or less power in this sense. I'm not talking about things like political power. That's a whole other conversation. But in this sense, you and I have no more or less power than any other being or creature or anything. If you go out into nature and you see the majestic redwoods in my home state of California, or you see the Pacific Ocean that I love so much there too, or wherever you go in nature, you don't have to look at those things as somehow more powerful than you. They're not. We're all made of the same stuff. You have as much power as an erupting volcano or as a breaching whale generates as it leaps from the water. Hi, Kelly. The thing we're always trying to fix is the story about ourselves, which is an illusion and exhausting. Precisely. So, the reason why I put this as the first step, if you will, is because it kind of eliminates everything everything else. When you remember who you are, when you remember that, when you look at the sun and you remember that's me. That's me. When you look at the stars and you go, "Oh my gosh, that's me too." Then why would we ever, ever, ever need to worry about a story that is going through our minds about who we are or what we're capable of or anything? So that's the first step. You thought this was going to be like a low key conversation, right? Remember who you are. Before I go into the second step, do you have any reflections that you'd like to share in the comments about that? Honestly, if you left this conversation right now, which I hope you don't, but if you left this conversation right now, you would have what I feel is the most important piece that we can ever be privy to, which is knowing that we are not the ideas or the thoughts or the feelings or the stories. That has nothing to do with who we actually are. And we can look to our own lives for examples of this, as I just mentioned. We can look at other people. We can see evidence of it everywhere if we just, as I like to say, raise our gaze a little bit instead of looking down at all of this minutia. And we just need to lift our chins up a little bit and look, and we can see who we are. All right. Are you ready for step 2? Tell me in the chat if you're here with me live. This is an idea that came to me fairly recently. And I don't think it's a new idea. Maybe bring it on. I don't think it's a new idea necessarily, but the way that it came to me was really interesting. So, step 2 is live like no one is watching you. Live like no one is watching you. How does that grab you? Live like no one's watching you. You are here to, oh, that's powerful, Jimmy says. You are here to live this life force. You are not here to live the way someone else thinks you're supposed to. You're not here because ooh, good, Mimi, a relief. You're not here to live for anyone else, if that makes sense. You don't owe anyone anything. And because of what we've already stated, my hope is that you're hearing this in context. I'm not saying we should be unkind to people. However, it's not our responsibility to try to live in a certain way so that someone will appreciate us, someone will love us, or so that we can get something or whatever. That isn't the point. You are allowed to live like no one is watching, because in truth, no one is watching. No one is watching. Jimmy, earlier you said that you were, I can't see the comment right now, but like an observer. That's true to a certain point, but it doesn't mean that there is any judgment going on around how you are living out this powerful story that's coming through you. This life story that's coming through you is coming through you even more clearly when you live like no one is watching. So here's a question for you. If you were living as if no one was watching, give me an example of what you would be doing. What is something you would be doing if you started to live that way? I am always very inspired by people who, and we'll get more into this in step 3, but just a preview. I'm always inspired by people who are very open about just being themselves. Do you know what I mean? Maybe in the way that they dress or the way that they, you know, adorn themselves or whatever it is. And there's so much in the way of societal rules around those things. And I'm not saying some of those aren't valid, but we are free to live in this way because we are free. We are free, notwithstanding, again, social constraints that many people live under. In this bigger context, we are free to live as if no one is watching. What would that look like for you? What is something you can think of right away that you would be doing, that you would be creating, that you would have if you lived like that? Hi, Jimmy. I would be using my voice to make an impact. I would be being more authentic. I can relate, Jimmy, because for me, this talk is me living as if no one is watching, because I just decided I'm going to say what I want to say, no holding back, no couching what I'm saying. It's just coming through me, through this powerful force. And that to me also equals, as you say, being more authentic, because when we live in this way, the filters start to fall away, if that makes sense. And again, we can start to listen to these desires and we can start to act on them, not in the way that we talked about earlier, but in a, oh gosh, it's hard to explain it. I know you've had this feeling before where you've heard something within you and you've just gone with it. You've just gone with it. And it feels so natural and so easy and so effortless and just like it's you, because it is you. It's that life force, that power that is you. That is what we can do more and more of the time. Thanks for that, Jimmy. Hi, Mimi. I would laugh out loud in a cinema when I think the movie is funny. My daughters hate it. Interesting. That's a really, even though you say you're kind of kidding, I know what you're talking about. And I'm sure other people listening can relate to that, where you feel a lot of the time like you've got to hold back. That's why I said this is a no holding back zone. So I'm glad you shared that. Joking aside, I would just do what I want to do without worrying about what other people think, following my heart. Yes, because as I said, you don't owe anyone anything, because what's actually happening is that this life with a capital L is being lived through you. And I don't know if this will make sense, but life's desires are your desires. Your desires are life's desires. Gosh, I can feel myself getting emotional here. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to question those anymore. I don't want to um, I don't want to question whether or not those are the right things or the wrong things or whatever. I just want to live that. I want to be that. I want to do that. I want to have whatever that brings to me. Um, Let me know if that's making sense to you. Kelly says, this opens a can of worms for me. Ooh, Kelly, I'm very curious if you'd like to share more. Since this is a no holding back, judgment free place, you're welcome to share more if you want to. I think that it's what I'm saying is, oh, you're getting emotional too, Mimi. I think what I'm saying basically is that, you know, I've said for many years that to me, our life purpose was fulfilled the moment we came into being. That we don't have to go find our life purpose because we've already fulfilled it. And when we are given wants and desires and things like that, it's because that's part of the story that's being lived through us. And that's what it looks like we are meant to be doing. Kelly says, in certain areas I do this, and others definitely no. I appreciate that. And I'm the same. I think that we can take this idea in of living like no one is watching, and it will start to materialize more and more and more, even without us trying to do that. It will just start to take hold because, in essence, as I was saying before, no one is watching. That's another story that we're listening to. This is a little thing that happened, little thing, but it was actually quite poignant for me. You may have heard me say this before, but it's an example that comes to mind. Many years ago, when I had first started my business and I wanted to make a change, I was talking with a coach about it, a friend of mine who was also a coach. And I was telling her, I'm nervous about making this change in my business. And she was like, nobody's watching, Mary. Nobody cares. She said to me as a joke, you're not Oprah. Nobody's paying attention. You can go do what you want. Just do what you want. Nobody's watching. Nobody cares about that. What do you want? What is calling to you to do? And I've remembered that. And that story kind of pivoted into what I'm sharing with you now, which is live like no one is watching. That is step 2, which sounds a little weird to say. But the essence of what she told me was absolutely true. I was taking it in a smaller context, but in a bigger context, she couldn't have been more accurate. So before I go into step 3, which is the final one, I'd like to pause for just a moment. And if you'd like to share in the chat, or if you're watching or listening on the replay, you can take a moment if you like. And if you'd like to share with me, if you're here with me live, what has really come through for you so far since we've been together about, first of all, what it means to have anything that you want. And for me, the essence of that is not necessarily in the tangible things, but in having this experience of listening to what is calling to us to do, because it's there for something that we can't even comprehend. Hi, Mimi. I think what's making me so emotional is feeling like I can finally be me. Yes, I want to shine brightly. Mimi and everyone, as we said earlier, you are not the sum total of anything that's come before or anything that's going to come after. You are not a story about yourself. You're not any of those things. You are not any of those things. And being you, Mimi, to me means when I look at you, I see life itself. I see how that power is being lived out through you in whatever form it takes. The form itself doesn't even matter. It's the fact that each of us is telling the story of life and life's power in specific ways. Jimmy says, number 2 is powerful because self-concern, being overly self-conscious, is exactly what has been blocking me. Oh, wow. Oh, you're welcome, Jimmy. That's really powerful because I think you're not alone there. I think that many of us are self-conscious about what we say, what we do, all of these different things. And the fact is that those, again, are stories that have no real bearing on anything. They can't touch who you really are, what you really are. We don't have to be concerned about that anymore. It's just not part of the equation. So let's go to our final step 3. Are you ready for this? Kelly says, this word power is making me curious. Not the power of my story, but the power of life living through me. Yes. And I love that you use the word curious, Kelly, because that is a big piece of what it means to live in this way. We start to get curious about what this powerful story is. What could I actually experience? What could I actually have in this life? What could I actually discover about what's going on here if I focused on remembering who I am, and if I focused on living as if no one is watching, and I can just let whatever wants to come through me come through me? What would happen then? What would that be like? So I'm right there with you, Kelly. All right, step 3. Step 3 relates to step 2, but it takes it a little bit further. Step 3, stop explaining yourself and start expressing yourself. I'll say that again. Step 3, stop explaining yourself and start expressing yourself. Have you ever had the sense that before you could do something, or as Jimmy mentioned, you're self-conscious, that, thank you, Mimi, that you have to somehow explain why you want to do something. You have to somehow justify it. You have to somehow, make sense of it to someone else or even to yourself. But if we are doing step 2, which is living as if no one is watching, then why do we ever have to explain ourselves? Why would that ever be necessary? As I mentioned, we don't owe anyone an explanation in that way. It's not our role to keep explaining ourselves, why I'm doing this and why I'm not doing that and all of that. We can just let go of all of that stuff. Let go. And, oh, thank you, Kelly. And then just express what you want to express. Going back to my admiration for people who outwardly express themselves, like I said, maybe through the way they dress, or artists who just tell it like it is in whatever art form that they have. I think that that's beautiful because they don't wait for they don't wait around, trying to explain why they've dyed their hair a certain color, or why they have tattoos, or why their art looks like this. It's like, that's me, and that's it. That's it. Kelly says, I feel like I explain to myself to justify. I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to that. I used to do that too. I do it less and less and less and less. And that's what I realized was that one thing that I have really stopped doing, especially just as I'm talking to you over the last maybe 6 months, is I've stopped explaining why I'm doing certain things, and I'm just doing them, and I'm expressing myself through them. And that's all there is. Because I realized I don't need to waste my time explaining myself to someone, or like you say, justifying it even to myself. Why would I need to do that? I am feeling this power of life that is being lived through me. I am listening to what it's calling to me to do. More and more, I am engaging in life as if no one is watching except for this life force that's coming through all of us. And I've found that the need to explain anything is just going away. It's just going away. So if you were to have a day, let's say, that was purely based on you living with this sense of power, of living as if no one was watching, of not explaining yourself, what would that look like? What would a day in your life look like? If I were to watch you, what would you be doing? Or if it's not something you would be doing, but something you would experience within yourself, what would that be like? I'd love to hear that. Mimi says, what I feel is that there's no reason to be afraid of what might happen when I start to express myself because this power is benevolent. Not only that, I don't know that I necessarily agree with benevolent. To me, it seems neutral. To me, it seems neutral. And that's where I find the excitement, frankly, is that it's unknown, but it's neutral. It's not benevolent or malevolent. It's neither. It's neutral. And it's a force that is, like I've said, being lived through us and coming out of us in all of these ways that we are called to express it. And so I would really love to know if you care to share it. That's great. If not, you don't have to, but I would love to know what it would look like if you were living in the way that we have been talking about. What is something that might change for you? What is something that you might do that you're not doing now? Mimi says, I mean, I don't have to be afraid of it. I should be more afraid of not expressing myself. Interesting. I can relate to that. You don't have to be afraid of it because even if you are venturing into unknown territory, like let's say you are, feeling the call to do something that you've never done before. Well, the reason you don't need to be afraid of doing that is because you can look back on your life experience and say, well, every time I have not known how to do something, I've always figured it out. I've always met the challenge. I've always had an answer. So why do I need to be nervous this time? You don't. You don't have to be afraid of the unknown because the unknown is this beautiful neutral space where all of our creativity is, all of our resilience, all of our courage, all of those things that we talked about. That's where it lives. Mimi says, I would be filling my day with inspiring others to be more of who they are meant to be. I just realized that I do that already. Well, if you're doing that already, what would it mean to take that to the next level? If you lived that as if no one was watching you, if you started to express yourself rather than explain yourself, what would that look like? If you were living in a way that was you being responsive to this power that is what you're made of, what would that look like? I would be on stage speaking to thousands of people. Amazing, Mimi. That's amazing. And of course it's possible. Of course it's possible. Not that you think it's impossible. You didn't say that, but I heard in my mind, that you might be thinking it's not possible. Of course it is possible, because why wouldn't it be? When we move from a place of self-judgment, when we move from a place of listening to a story about ourselves, and we move into living more and more from this truth, anything can happen and everything can happen. There is nothing that's out of bounds. There are no limits. There are no limits. We like to imagine that there are limits. I think maybe it makes us feel safer or something. I'm not even sure, but there aren't any. And as my coach said before, you can do what you want. Just do what you feel called to do. Do what you feel called to do. I know you can do it because you're not afraid to speak in public. That is one of the stories that's being lived through you, is someone who has the power to speak and to ignite people. So if you are here with me live, I would really love to know an example, not just Mimi, but anybody else who's here. What would you be doing? What would it look like if you stopped having to justify yourself to yourself or to anyone else? What would it look like if you were living in a more free and easy way, other than continuing to listen to any made up ideas about who you really are? And if you're having trouble imagining that, it's okay. Total bliss, maybe says. What is so fascinating to me too is that, really, how can I say this? I've never really said this before, so I haven't really said anything I've been talking about here before. But you're not meant to be anyone else. Who you are is who you should be. Who you are is who you should be. Who you are is who you are meant to be. And remember, who you are is not the story about you. It's who you actually are, what you actually are. That's what's real. And to reiterate my earlier point, your purpose was fulfilled just by your presence. And now everything that you're doing is just more and more of life being experienced and lived through you. And that is what you are supposed to be doing. That's why there's no judgment about anything that's come before, because there's no reason to. All of that was also part of the story, the powerful story that you have brought to life. I can only be me. Everyone else is already taken. Right? Exactly. So how are you all feeling? If you're here with me live, have you felt a shift in your energy? Have you felt any sort of permission, I guess I would say, for you to act on this power, for you to act on this limitlessness that you are made of, without being so overly self-conscious or overly concerned about what some result or consequence might be? Again, I'm not talking about, hurting someone or anything like that, but just in the scheme of things, we can be so caught up in these fake ideas about what could happen if and all of these things. We can just let go of all of that. Just kind of bring our shoulders down. Don't have to carry that weight any longer. It's just not necessary. Mimi says, emotional, I love it. A massive shift. Oh, you're very welcome. Yes, you do have permission. You have permission, not from me, not from even yourself, but from who you actually are, what you actually are. That is where this permission comes from. And we can continue to live in a way that doesn't fully express that, or we can go big. We can go bold. We can start to do things that we've never done before. I also think that that is part of it, where you are not meant to keep doing the same things over and over again. That is not what we're designed for. Life is meant to transform and change. And as Kelly said, expand and be spacious. Kelly says we can trust it. I feel too, Kelly, that trust is almost unnecessary, because it would be like saying that I need to trust that that the sun will, that will rotate around the sun. The truth is the truth, and it doesn't need to be trusted. We can simply be it as we are and start to act more from there. Let me know if that makes sense, Kelly. I often find that people can get caught up in this idea, oh, I have to trust myself. I don't subscribe to that at all. That seems like a waste of energy to me. I don't need to trust that there is life being lived through me. I don't need to trust that you and I are made of infinite power. It's just the way that it is. It's obvious. We don't even have to look very far. Like I said, we can look at a blade of grass or a dandelion coming up through the cement, and we can see that. We can be as bold as that blade of grass every day. We can take big steps. We can take little steps. We can do whatever we are called to do, because that's what we're supposed to do. We are not meant to live small. We are meant to express this infinite nature of ourselves. And in doing so, we can have anything we want in the form of whatever that takes, if that makes sense. That's why I don't ever feel the need to envision specifics. Oh, I want this or I want that or whatever. It's just more like I want to discover. The only thing that I really want to have is more discovery of what I am and what you are and what all of us are. That's what we ultimately, it seems to me, are yearning for. It's not the thing or the achievement or whatever. That's not what that yearning is about. That yearning is about, I want to know more about me, about myself, about you. I want to understand more. I want to feel more. I want to experience more. I want to discover more about what's really going on here. Hi, Mimi. I feel like I had to hear this to be reminded. Kelly, yes, discover and uncover. Yes, exactly. And I have attempted in this talk to sort of condense that into these three ideas of remember who you are, live like no one is watching, stop explaining yourself and start expressing yourself. It really is that simple. It doesn't have to be a million and one steps. It's like, oh yeah, I know who I am. I know who I am. Nobody's watching. It's all neutral energy for me to utilize and put into any form that I want to. Anything that is calling to me, I can use that to express myself. And I don't have to explain that to anyone, least of all to myself. So as we close out this conversation, I will just ask anyone who is here live if there is anything else that you would like to say, any insights you've had as you've been listening. This is not the kind of conversation where, you kind of take it in and then you just forget it. You may forget the actual words that we've said, but the experience will stay with you. And those reminders will stay with you, whether you remember the exact words that I used or not, it doesn't matter. When you have a transformational experience, it stays with you. Even if you can't remember it, even if you can't describe it again in the next hour. And I have certainly had that in being here with you. So thank you for this wonderful conversation. I'll just wait, take a little sip of water and see if anyone has anything else they would like to say. Mimi says, I will not forget the feeling I wrote down the quote unquote steps. I will remember. Thank you. You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Of the three things that I talked about, was there one that stood out the most for you? Was there one that when you heard it, you were like, oh, yeah, I recognize myself. I heard some of that in the conversation, but it's just fun to reflect on what we've heard. And my heart is just full of gratitude at the moment. Oh, step 2. Yeah, step 2 about living like no one is watching. That idea has really been important to me and continues to raise the level of importance in my life. And really all of it together. I mean, if you really think about it, it all comes back to recognizing that we are free to, that's so interesting, Kelly, because I was just say free to live, and you said it goes beyond just surviving. Yeah, we are free to live. We are free to truly live this power that is coursing through us and express it in any way that it is calling to us to do so. Yes, it goes beyond just surviving. My dream would be that every single person on the planet would be living in a situation in which they could do what we're talking about. And my theory is that the more of us who are in a place in which to do this, the more that we do this, the more that we live more freely and with this sense of purpose, in that we're listening to what's calling to us and we are doing that, then that will allow others to do that too, who maybe can't right now. So I almost feel like it's our responsibility to live more and more this way and to pay attention to the callings of our heart and to answer them instead of trying to push them down and just assume that there's some reason why we can't. There is no reason. And in fact, there's reason to listen and to act on what we hear. Thank you, Mimi. Any other comments before we come to a close? I will be sending you a note a little while after we finish with some things for you, including links to the replay and a couple of other things. So be on the lookout for that. Oh, I love you too, Mimi. I love everybody who was here, everyone who has participated in the replay. You mean the world to me. And if you walk away with anything from this talk, I want it to be that you know that there isn't anything wrong with you. You're not broken. Nothing needs to be fixed. And in fact, you are a beautiful, perfect story of power and of life itself. And you are free to express that in any way that it comes to you to do that. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a joy to host this class, and I just thank you and love you so much. I will talk to you again soon. Bye for now, and I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening wherever you are in the world. Bye. Thank you, Mimi. Thanks, everybody.